So much for a slow intro, huh? You can hear the typing, hear my 80 words a minute going by. All right, hey everybody, thanks for coming. This is jumping in the chat already. A lot of faces I recognized, so to speak, as they say. Really appreciate it. So I want to thank everybody for coming. I think this is our fourth live stream. They've been doing really well, having a good time. I've been working on a project on Deluxes, so I thought we could talk about that, and then you can drag me kicking and streaming into talking about any kind of gear, non-gear, clean out the closets. That's what I've been doing the last 2 weeks. So I could talk a little bit about what left and what stayed. There's links for the store, and there's a tip jar in the description. Be sure that if I don't see your question, you can just address it with my name and get my attention, or throw something in the top chat, and I'll be sure to get to it. Phil, the inimitable Phil, is here moderating. He's tough, so everybody be nice. I should add that Phil grabbed a great deal on a 64 Custom Deluxe not too far back, and it was just before I bought this one actually for the project, although he's I guess, really just partly to blame. Before we go into it, I need to thank the guys at Dave's Guitar Shop. I often use photos from them. Their photographer and bass player on staff there is Tim Mullally, and Tim's an amazing photographer. They did great stuff. Dave's Guitar Shop in Wisconsin, so they're kind of old friends of the channel. If you have a collection of vintage guitars like Dave Rogers, that's a good friend for somebody like me to work on. And Dave and Phil have been great. Tim have been great. As I said, I've been working on a course on YouTube, and I've also been working on this project on Deluxes. I don't really do many gear reviews, as you know, and the reason is that when I feel like I am going to work on a piece of gear, I need to play it for a long time. In this case, I didn't really have an experience with Deluxes until in the last, I guess it's been just this last 6 months. And I've got a whole bunch of reasons that kind of led me here. So I thought I'd kind of run through those, kind of give you a sense of, like my buddy Zach Childs did on his video on Deluxes that's done so well. I thought that I'd kind of run you through kind of how I got to this project and why I thought of it. And then we'll open it up and we'll all debate what we think is the best amp of all time, of course. So the first one is I saw a video with interview with JD Simon. I think it was on Guitarist Magazine, where he was talking about how when he had a chance to tour his own records, and he had done this gig at Robert's. What's the name of that bar? This famous bar in downtown Nashville. Anybody can jump it right in here. Anyway, he did this gig. And he was playing a Deluxe with a Telecaster for years. And so when he finally got a chance to go out on his own, he got a half stack Marshall and a Les Paul. And then after a while, he kind of thought, I'm kind of doing what my heroes played instead of what I hear in my head. And the guys came to load up for a tour, and there he was with his Blackface Deluxe. And that was something he did. And I really liked the idea that, Simon kind of came around to this idea that it was his voice that he was working on. And then I've seen it a couple of times. There's a great rig rundown the Premier Guitar guys did with Johnny Lang, who's just an incredible blues guitar player. And he carries a vintage Deluxe on the road, and then they rent a Deluxe locally. And he plays with two Deluxes facing a pair of mics, looking at the Deluxes. And this is a guy playing in theaters. And of course, people joke sometimes. There you go, Robert's Western World. Thanks, Chris. Everybody jokes that if you just mention Bill Frisell's name in a live stream, I'll materialize on that live stream, and that's kind of true. Though he plays a Gibson GA18, which is a 10-inch speaker, 12-watt, old Gibson vintage amp on records often, he has a Deluxe in his rider. So here's a guy who's touring all over the world, and it's a guy whose tone I always like, and of course, tone's in your hands, but especially in Bill's case. But that's a really cool thing. So, and then John Bollinger did this interview with Guthrie Trapp that I think I've probably quoted this. The guys at Premier Guitar are very generous and let me use their clips. And there's this moment when John Bollinger's interviewing Guthrie Trapp where they're talking about the fact that in the Fender line, you can pretty much get the tone in different sizes. You can have a Princeton, or, he's got a Princeton. I know Guthrie has a Princeton with a 12-inch. And then you could take a Deluxe. And if you want something bigger than Deluxe, take a Barber reverb, take something else, take something bigger, a Super reverb. And really, once you leave the Princetons, Dan Lurie from FYD would tell us, remind us that really you're dealing with the same preamp. It's the power amp section and the speaker choices that's really varying. So the sound that you get, of course, the overall package is different, but the sound that you're going to get is that preamp, that is that classic Fender sound. And you'll get no argument from me that Princeton's right up there for me as far as lifetime amplifiers as well. And then Jared Taylor's a friend of mine from New Hampshire, and the guy that I used to do Wednesday night jams with for a couple of years before we moved out of state. And the cool thing was that Jared kind of went through gear really rapidly. He was doing a lot of session work up in New England, and he also was doing everything from straight ahead jazz and fusion gigs to singer-songwriter kind of gigs. And then I guess there's these amps, these 64 Deluxes that Phil got and I got one, came out in, I guess, 2017. So it was probably 2019, 2018 that Jared got a 64 Custom, and he has not changed. So here's a guy who used to flip amps, every 4 or 5 months, and then he just settled in. So all of these kind of things were in my head when I started getting to know friends like Brad Jetter of Jetter Pedals and David Barber from Barber Electronics. Both of those guys told me that they designed pedals with a Deluxe. I think Brad has a 66 and David has a Deluxe Reverb reissue, which of course is a very common amp, and so it makes perfect sense that you would be designing pedals to be in that world where you're modifying it. Jeff Mackerlane and I always joke that you can make, and kind of it's almost an axiom really, you can make a Fender sound like a Marshall, but you can't make a Marshall sound like a Fender. And part of it is because of what I was just saying about pedal designers designing for that. And then really the final straw was Zach Childs. The fact that Zach has come the long way around himself to this, to a Deluxe, and he and I talking so much about what sort of constitutes a great Deluxe, and clipping the bright cap and all those kinds of things that I'm sure we'll touch on maybe here. But when the first Tone Masters came out, they sort of were the original stuff, the original black face spec. And then about a year later, they came out with this blonde version of the Tone Master where they had virtually clipped the bright cap. And I actually called Dan Lurie to update myself on kind of reminding me how the bright cap works on these and why people clip them and why that's it. And then, so I reached out to Fender and asked about borrowing a blonde Tone Master. And then I got that they were supposed to get to me in September, and it didn't come till maybe late in October. So it came later. But as I said, I always need to play something for quite a while. So the amps that have been here for the last few streams actually are the ones that I've been playing. And before they were here, they were downstairs in my practice space. And so I got the blonde one in, played that for a while. And then, of course, because it's me, I had to try the first one. So I bought a used black Tone Master. It was actually from a studio in Florida, and they had even gone so far as to remove the Tone Master medallion from the front. So at a glance, you wouldn't know this isn't a Deluxe Reverb reissue until you go to lift it, and it only weighs 24 pounds. And then I got it in my head that I didn't really have a bass line for the full-on tube Deluxe. So I sold some things, and I went ahead and I bought a 64 Custom hand-wired Deluxe, which we could burn an hour on alone, probably. And around the same time, the guys at Two Notes were bringing out their Captor X. And I was really intrigued by the ability of the Tone Master to dial down the volume to such a great extent in the virtual, power amp section. And I thought, if you had a Captor X and this much, much more expensive 64 Custom, couldn't you really have kind of even the last couple of features that are missing? The only thing for me that's missing from the Tone Master, besides the complete on, full tube goodness of the tremolo and the reverb, which is probably where you feel it the most in a Tone Master, is that there's no, here it is a solid state amp and they didn't bother to put a headphone jack on the back. Otherwise, in my opinion, a deluxe reverb, a Tone Master Deluxe would probably be the absolutely perfect amp to take away to college for any guitar student who's going off to school for music. But without the, I got to say, without a headphone jack, then that really hurts that. That's 24 pounds. The 64 Custom only weighs 38 pounds. And I dug this out the other day. I think a Princeton, stock Princeton is 34. So you're almost double the wattage and you're into a very similar kind of thing, but you've got a lot more going. And with the Captor X, of course, you've got IRs and you've got some of the stuff that's, and a lot more flexibility, of course, that you've got in the Tone Master at a much higher price point. So this is the big deluxe project. And for me, I've been fascinated by this idea. And those of you that maybe pay attention to this probably noticed that in the wake of buying the Les Paul, the R9, I kind of took that as an opportunity to clean out. And I actually have sold five amplifiers, 2 guitars, pounds and pounds of pedals. So that was the reason to get started on this. And the reality is that I'm always fascinated by, how few can you do it with. I actually had an email exchange on the Deluxe video because there's a little clip of Andy Martin being interviewed at TPS, and Mick Taylor wrote me back and he said, I could do it with 1 guitar, even 1 pedal, but the idea of 1 amp for the rest of his life filled him with, I think what he said was a cold, dark horror, which I thought was great. And I was going to ask him if I could put that in the actual video that I'm going to do next week. But this idea of having 1 amp and really concentrating on the playing, of course, very much on brand is very much something I think about a lot. Although I still don't anybody feel bad for me. I still have, I think, 4 or 5 amps plus my bass amp, and many of which I built, myself with Dan Lurie. So let's see. Boy, there's been a lot of stuff going by in the chat here. We're only 10 minutes in. My voice is a little squeaky today. I don't know what's going on with that. So let's see. Let's do some questions about deluxes here. Maybe Phil can help me find questions about deluxes. I'm going to go all back as far as I can and then start over there. A non-deluxe question. Octavio Leon says, why is this camera so good? This is just a Lumix S5 on the advice of Jeff Mackerlane, and it does a great job until it cuts out, which really has to do with the kind of iffy nature of the direct power thing. Yeah, so Jeff Banner, we don't always want to wade right into the gear thing. So Jeff said, where did the Strandbergs go? So it's funny, when I did the interview with Fluff on Riffs, Beards, and Gear, he was kind of pointing out this sort of duality of the way I play and the stuff I play. So I was joking earlier today with Phil that this is the 3 food groups right here. I've got an EJ Strat right over my shoulder. There's an R9 Les Paul, and that's my Telecaster that I put together from parts. So this is the traditional Keith world. The Strandbergs, there's one in the closet. That's my sort of jazz Strandberg that everybody's seen. I think probably it's the red, candy apple red one with the mini humbucker in the neck. And then I also still have the butterscotch one, but I actually had to sell 2 of the Strandbergs to help pay for the R9. And that's okay. I mean, those are still the guitars that I'm going to put over my shoulder and take to a jam session or take even to a jazz pickup gig probably. But it was good to reduce the total number of guitars down. And they haven't morphed. They're just, they're getting swapped out. I've been playing those. And I thought the Les Paul has been such a revelation to me. And this is a particularly good one. I saw that somebody was asking if I was going to get the pickguard put on. I'm still going to get the pickguard put on the Les Paul. This is one of these incredible things. And I don't want to slam. I don't know all the guys in the custom shop at Gibson right now. But the Les Paul pickguard came in the case. And after a few days, I was sort of thinking I would go ahead and do it. So I pulled it out, and I go to put it on the guitar, and it didn't fit correctly. It doesn't go right up against the neck. That's the cuts in the pickguard for the front pickup is not deep enough. And this is not an inexpensive guitar. So it's kind of incredible to me that, anyway, that has to happen. So I've got to get it to a luthier to do that. Rowdy Yates is asking what attenuator I'm using. I'm using, this is a Captor X. Hey, Steve, thanks. Do you find the Deluxe to be too loud, a little loud for home small gig use? The Captor X takes care of the 64. With a Captor X, you gain the addition of the speaker load, and you can absolutely do, then you can just use headphones. You can turn the speaker off. It's got 3 levels of attenuation, and I'd say the first one is hardly noticeable. The middle one, for me, takes it sort of down into Princeton territory, and the lowest one makes it almost like it'd be below speaking voice level. I don't really understand what that's for, except maybe for output, for changing the output. Oh man, so many good things in the chat. I'm gonna have to do the questions and then double back. Somebody's asking about the comparative of this to the Rivera Stage 4. I'm sorry, I don't know that amp, Jerry. All right, let's do the questions that Phil's done, and then we'll back up. TCM is here. He's reminding me that college kid needs at least a Mesa Coliseum to get by. Perry lives in a world of boutique Stratocasters and high-powered, in my world, high-powered. I guess a Deluxe in Perry's world would be like a Champ in mine, probably. Barry 15, do you know why the medallion was removed? I think they removed the medallion because they didn't want to make a big deal out of the fact that it wasn't a tube amp. And frankly, I think, did I tell this story already? The story about calling the guys at Keeley. So this really very much applies to like the Tone Master. A few years ago, I was going to do a video. I was working on a video about, I was thinking about doing one about the Red Dirt, which is a tube screamer type, modded tube screamer that Keeley has. And they had a full-size one and they had a mini one. And so I got on the phone. I was actually talked my way onto the phone with an engineer from Keeley. And I said, so do they sound the same? Does the Mini sound the same? And he's like hemming and hawing. He's like, well, you know, they're really much smaller components, and so they're very close, but it's not exactly the same. And then I pushed him, and finally he said, yeah, oh, you know what? They sound different, but it's nothing you're going to hear once the drummer starts to play. And I played jazz gigs, and my drummer was still plenty loud. I have a ringing in my ears to prove it, of course, to this day. And that's an interesting point about the Tone Master. I think that you'd probably, like with most modeling amps of any kind, it's going to be more in feel. But I actually find that's mitigated quite a bit by using analog drive pedals in front. You've heard me talk about that before. And actually, I talked to a guy on the West Coast who could really afford to play any amps he wants, and he actually is playing a cream tone, a blonde Tone Master as well. Yeah, there's Karina asking about the pickguard. Yeah, we're going to get back to that. Okay. All right, so let's have at it here. Oh, there's Robert Baker. Hey, Robert. Robert says the R9 is just taunting us all. It's not taunting anybody. He's perfectly happy there. Oh, although I will say that's the first time it's been on the wall. It's been sitting right here, and I just got this Stratocaster out today because Perry and I were going back and forth about Stratocasters, and so I got my EJ back out and was playing some sacrilegious though it is, maybe some Robin Ford lines. I've been working on diminished lines of licks of his. And my wife came up and she saw Annie saw that it was hanging on the wall, and it made her nervous that a guitar that cost more than either of our first used cars cost is hanging up on the wall. Frank McCreary wants to know favorite Barber OD for use with a deluxe reverb. You know, Frank, the reality is that I don't think you could find an overdrive that's going to sound bad going into a deluxe. Either of these, actually. I find the Tone Master does pedals really well. And I should just say, obviously, I'm not beholden to the boys at Fender. I actually have an interesting thing with Fender in that the guys in the artist relation area are great. Steve Taylor and those guys they're great. They're just really nice guys. They're down to earth. They know everybody. They know very much on the job. Fender corporate, I think I had 4 or 5 million views on Fender videos alone, and I'd never heard from them. So it's sort of like it's a big company, and it's kind of hard to love a really big company, especially if you grew up in the 70s like I did, all that counterculture stuff and, blue jean shirts and all. So the ones that I use with a Deluxe, and if you want to hear how that works so well, is a Barber direct drive, which is, David just packed so much value into his pedals. It's a Marshall pedal in a box style pedal that's really designed to work very well with a Fender amp. And in the Beano on a Budget video, Jeff McErlane used one of my direct drive actually into his brother's '64 Princeton. And as good as the Origin sounded, and as good as Jeff's '71 Marshall sounds, everybody agreed that taking that Princeton, that direct drive into that Princeton, and then into the aux box using a 4x12 emulation IR, it was ridiculous. It was just sounded so good. And the thing that Jeff said was it just felt so good. The other Barber pedal that I use all the time is a Burn Unit Super Sport, which actually David's not building right now. He's building a Burn Unit, which he's really enhanced, and I'm dying to get my hands on one, but he burned right through the first batch of enclosures he got, and I didn't have one for me to check out yet. But that's on my list. So those are the two that I use the most. Electric Guitar Video is asking, do I like the Fender Champ? Well, it is 5 watt world after all. I actually sent 2 of my Champ size amps back to Dan Lurie so he had those to demo for people. And I have, it'll be up here for one of the live streams or for a video. I still have what Dan calls a desktop Champ, which is a hand-built blackface spec Champ with a mid control. And I've said before, you can make a whole record with just that. So let me look for some more questions. Oh, Chris Lumen says, how are the cleans on a G20 when compared to a more classic Deluxe? That's a great question, especially those are both amps that I've spent a lot of time with the last year. I probably pay my D20 more, only because I always feel like this is funny because the fact is I had a job in technology before I retired to do this stuff. And so to say that I'm not comfortable with it, but really when it comes to amps, I'm much more of a single channel guy. The G20 is wonderful. I hardly ever use the drive channel, so I'm pretty much using the other channel. And it has a wide button, which kind of acts like a loudness control. I think I've said this here before. I think they get really close. And I actually tend to retube the first valve position. I retube them with Amperex Bugle Boy tubes, which is my favorite preamp tube, a new old stock preamp tube. And I've collected a few of those now. They get really 3D. They're really wonderful. And they're very much like an old Muller. If you can get your hands on those. And preamp tubes last a long time. So I don't really condone or encourage people to buy vintage power tubes. But I think spending money on vintage preamp tubes, if from a good, respectable dealer, is a good idea. Those really changed the feel of the Revs to me, and that was something that was interesting back and forth with me with the guys with Derek Eastfield at Rev. He was really interested in how much that changed that amp for me. So I think they're very comparable. Sean Tubbs has done some wonderful videos about the clean tones on the Rev G20 series amps that are great. So I'd encourage you to go check those out. Michael Easter's encouraging me to reach out to Gibson and see if they can make that right. Yeah, I don't want to send him the guitar, Michael. I'm kind of, that was my gut reaction. And I'll tell you that I was talking to Rick Beato the other day, and we were talking about his signature guitar coming, and he's like, oh, that's crazy that pickguard doesn't fit. I'm going to call Cesar. I'm like, Rick, you know what? It's cool. I can play it like this. The guitar is great. I'm still getting used to it again. I haven't owned a Les Paul for probably 6 or 7 years. And the one before I wasn't in love with. I'm pretty smitten with this one. It weighs 7 pounds, 13 ounces, and it sounds like a Les Paul. So it sounds pretty great. Hey, there's Paul Ewing, the famous Mr. Ewing. Paul runs a blog, a pedal blog, very influential, big pedal blog out of England. And he says he's looking at blackface super reverbs, twins, and basements at the same time, 50-watt plexis, high watt 50s. No reason to change. I agree, Paul. If you can make that happen. Somebody before the stream started earlier today said that a JTM 45 makes its own reverb, and I quipped back that yeah, that's true. The comment said if you could turn it up where it needs to be turned up, and I said, well, yeah, if you turn it up where it needs to be turned up, then you're bouncing sound off your neighbors' houses, so it's certainly going to generate some reverb then. That's for sure. RSV, do you have an opinion about the Tone King Imperial Mark II? I have to tell you that I was very tempted to go towards a Tone King before I got the 64 custom. And I actually was laughing to myself because Dan Steinhardt did a video on putting custom, like high-end pickups in an inexpensive guitar. And I was chuckling because he bought a 65 Deluxe reissue, and it's sitting there, but over his shoulder you can see the Tone King Imperial that they own, which of course is a blackface and a tweed channel, version of a Deluxe, really. So he kind of had it all covered there in his little studio room there. So none of us need to feel bad for the pedal boys, of course. I haven't played them. I've heard them. Again, I'd actually steer you towards looking at Sean Tubbs. Sean has an FTR 37, which is a divided by 13 version of a Deluxe. That's his favorite amp of all time. And I think for the same reason that I'm saying that a Deluxe in general is thought of as such a great amp, it has just takes pedals incredibly well, has that classic Fender clean sound. It's interesting. I was talking to Dan Lurie earlier today about whether, sort of how influenced we are by the music we listened to growing up, and whether or not we would think that the sound of a Fender amp is the way we think of it as being the perfect clean. I wonder if that would be true if it wasn't such a historical reality, if we hadn't grown up with those, if instead, we lived in a world which was Marshall cleans first, and then, much more, and actually the cleans on a Marshall amp are a thing of beauty, but people don't talk about it being a clean amp, when of course they're great for that. So anyway, let's see, let me find some questions here. Michael Feisel says, straight up, are the Tone Master Deluxes good? I think they're great. I would be hard pressed. I mean, to be perfectly honest, probably if I was going to go do a jazz gig, it'd be between this. I have a DV Mark, which weighs just 17 pounds. It's a solid state amp, but it isn't trying to emulate a tube amp at all. And it's 45 watts, but in the world of, they talk about these, and it's funny, I was chuckling because the switch that's on the back that takes it from 22 watts down to 0.2 watts says 22 watts down to 0.2 watts. Well, if you go to the spec sheet, this is a 150 watt amplifier. But of course, the way tube amp handles volume and the way a solid state circuit handles volume is very different, and it's beyond my pay grade. I'm not an engineer, but I think all of us would know that they're very different. So but I thought it was funny that they label it as 22 watts. I think the Tone Masters are really good. Like I said, and I said this to the guys at Fender when I was talking to the AR guy recently. They were calling actually to see if I wanted to look at, they're going to release, it hasn't come out yet, they're going to release a 68 custom reissue Vibra Champ. And I don't know why they thought of me to look at that, but they did, and they wanted to know about sending one when they finally came into being available. So there's the DV Mark, there's this would be a choice. You could totally do a little jazz gig with the Rev D20 and the little Mojo Tone, speaker cab with the Neo Creamback. I should have said this. So the new blonde amp, one of the things that's cool about it is they clipped the bright cap, virtually speaking, because of course they're modeling a tube amp where it would or wouldn't have a bright cap. And so the bright cap across the volume pot on the bright channel, or the would be on the bright channel, has been clipped, virtually. And then the other thing that they did was they changed the reverb slope of the reverb amount pot, again, virtually, I assume, in the modeling. And then the final thing was they went from a Jensen Neo speaker to a Celestion Neo Creamback. And people that are on here often hear me talking about that being my favorite speaker anyway. So when I went to sort of test these against each other, I had enough Neo Creambacks from the guys at Mojo Tone that were in my 1x12 cabs. I had a pair of those. And so I was able to put a Neo Creamback in the original black one that's here. And I was able to put a Neo Creamback as a speaker upgrade, in my opinion, a speaker upgrade in the Deluxe Reverb, the 64 Custom. So they all have the same speaker now. And I really like those. And I also think that kind of smooths out the original circuit of this. Although without going too far down the rabbit hole here, one of the things that Fender did when they released the Blonde amp was that they actually offer a firmware upgrade so that you can actually download the clipped bright cap and the change to the reverb, or separately, and along with that, it changed the IR that's in the amp that comes out of the XLR output on the back, from being a Jensen IR, an impulse response of the Jensen speaker, changing it to a Creamback. So really, for either of these amps, in a moment, I mean, I do mean in a moment because I've done it on this one, you actually plug the amp in with a USB directly to your computer. It displays on my Mac here, it would just display on the top of the, on the desktop as if it's a hard drive. You drag the file to that hard drive and it blinks at you and you're done. That's it. It's completely changes the DSP, changes the way it deals with all that stuff. And pretty incredible, actually, that it changes it all out. So what I've got here actually now is a black original livery looking black and silver version of a Tone Master that's the complete blonde inside. And I said without the medallion on the front. All right, let's go back to get some questions here. Graham Elliott. Hey, Graham. Says that all of his amps have Neo Creambacks. Oh, there we are. We're the same man there. Legato Modidi. Help me, people. You ever try to get the Vox AV60? It's a modeler with a completely analog preamp tubes. No, it's not an amp I know. That's very cool. Jason Hobbs expresses his love for Princeton's. Yeah, I'm right there with you, Jason. Fluff has arrived. Wrist, beards, and gear in the house. Is Baker here? Robert is here, I'm sure, around. He's in a corner somewhere. He was asking me earlier about 251s, as if I'm the guy to ask. Harold Glop says, what speakers do you recommend to play a Princeton at apartment volumes with an attenuator? With an attenuator? With a Princeton, with an attenuator. Well, 10-inch in a Princeton, I have to say that I was pretty spoiled. I had a 5-watt with a Princeton preamp amp, and the speaker that was in it was an old CTS Utah that I got from Dan Lurie. So I haven't had to do the whole 10-inch speaker thing. So I'm probably not the guy to ask about that. I can tell you that Lurie likes in that amp, when he builds those, he likes to put the Jensen Tornado Neo. But he always seems to be having guys are asking for sort of that Jerry mod thing, really bright and cutting. So I think that's part of that. Let's see. Let's see. Motor Bikery wants to know, are you a minimalist when it comes to clothing? It looks like you wear a daily personal uniform, a black t-shirt and a denim shirt. Usually I don't go too much into this stuff on the channel, but hey, it's a live stream. It's a navy blue. It's totally a navy blue t-shirt. This is sort of my work uniform. This shirt, actually, to be perfectly candid, this shirt is the work uniform. This is what I use when I film. Somebody joked a couple live streams ago, I wore the shirt I was wearing all day, and it was a really beat up old version of this. And I have to say that these are not the same as they used to be. My wife was joking that I should put them up as an Amazon affiliate link that you could just go and buy a denim shirt like mine. I'm a child of the 70s motorbikery, so the fact is, denim and denim, what they refer to in Canada as a Canadian tuxedo, is something that I'm very comfortable in. All right. Okay, so let's get into this. So I've expressed that I think this totally works. So what? Everybody, tell me, what's your favorite amp of all time? What's your favorite amp? If you had to do it with one, in that whole, given the story I told about Mick Taylor finding that to be a terrifying world, what would you do? Eggman says leaning towards Princeton over a Tone Master. He's thinking of doing that. I think it comes down to. Jason wants the link to the shirt. I think that the Tone Master versus the Princeton for me would come down to whether you're going to gig. You need a good sound guy if you're going to gig a Princeton, or like Mike Campbell, have more than one amp and a great sound guy. So all right, now we're doing it. That's great. Princeton, Jason Hobb, Princeton, Beaumont Hardy, Yamaha TH10, THR10, YouTube commentator. The one I use. That's good. That's exactly what it is. Alessandro hand-wired. I never been near one. I couldn't give you. 1987X BMO. Mom says an AC30. Buzztone Plexi. Jason Lorenzen. Deluxe Reverb. Fender Vibrebird Brown Face. Nice, David. That's very nice. Blackface Princeton. Yeah, the reality is that the big difference between a Princeton and a Deluxe, and if Dan's out there on the stream, he can wade in and save me. The big difference is really in the phase inverter, and the fact that at room volumes you're pushing the power section harder, obviously, on a Princeton than you are on a Deluxe. And you're starting to get just a little bit of compression, probably. It's interesting, this whole conversation of decibels and sort of where does your hearing start to take some damage is a really interesting one to me as my ears ring away in the background here. But the reality is, my speaking voice probably right now is probably at 55, maybe 60 dBs. I'm alone here in the space, but so even at a spoken word volume, you're getting attention of a Princeton probably. You're probably in that 3-4 watts probably. If you spent much time with a Champ, you realize that there's 3 watts is really loud. That's really what it comes down to. Bill McCarthy says a GBX. Hridor Edvardson. There you go. I'm butchering that, aren't I? Hridor. Mesa, California, Tweed. Yeah, my friend John Cordy would tell you that that's a good one to choose. This thing jumps every once in a while. Frank McCreary saying he's on a Fractal a lot of the time these days. Mr. Singlecoin wants to know, where are some videos where I actually play guitar? Somebody put in the comments the other day, they said, I think you're one of my favorite guitar YouTubers, but I've never heard you play guitar. So if you dig back into the channel, early on, I wasn't making as many videos and I wasn't spending as much time researching and writing and filming and arranging guitar players who are so extraordinary, like Jeff and RJ. And I did a lot of playing on the early videos. I try to play every day, and I'm probably not getting as many hours a week of playing as I really had originally set out to do. But if you go back and look at demos, I did some tone print demos of the Hall of Fame reverb pedal, and I did one on the Flashback Mini. There's a demo of a Nobles Mini pedal. So the early videos have it, and actually you'll hear me playing in the background, and I don't bother to identify myself when it's me playing on one of my videos. But if there's nobody saying what the music is, and you don't recognize it as being like Tom Petty, sneaking it onto the Deluxe video, for example, then that's me playing. So you can hear me play. Let's see. Princeton is a really loud. Yeah, Jason, you're right. Princeton is a really loud amp. Can be really loud, especially depending on the speaker choice. The fellow that asked earlier is absolutely right. Matthew Kronk says Princeton. Dan Smith is a 68 Deluxe. I really love to play one of those, but I just haven't had a chance yet. Orange Rock Reverb 30. Nice. New Fender Vibrachamp Reverb. Is the new... Delmon DeVoe says the new Fender Vibrachamp Reverb. Is it going to be a reverb? I haven't read about it yet. BB Ninja is saying that a Princeton with a 12-inch Alessandro is great. and for whoever listens to Guthrie Trap. In other words, I think he's saying that that's what Guthrie has in his. It's cool. Cornell Romani. Yeah, boy, I've heard great things about Cornell. There's a guy that I watch. I've been watching him for years, Alberto Barrero from Spain. And I'm a huge fan of this guy's playing. He's a great channel. You should all go check him out if you haven't already. Just some of the best demos out there. He's a producer and a guitarist from Barcelona. And he did really way back, he did a demo of a Cornell amp, and I was just floored. But they're just not really, you just don't see them in the States. I just saw somebody was talking about the Rev amps, and then the stream did a jump on me. G-Mac is saying, do you prefer the silver or blackface Princeton reverb? They're very, very close. The reissues have been tweaked, and so they're different than the original ones. But boy, it doesn't make, you don't have to change many parts on an original silver face to make it into a blackface amp, as I talk about in the Deluxe Reverb history video that I did. Chris Quinn says, Trainwreck Express. Is that an aspirant, or do you actually own an Express, Chris? I'm prepared to be awed if you own one of those. Marshall DSL 40C. Oh, Scott DeMatteo says an Allen sweet spot. He's talking about David Allen's amps, Allen amps. David's an old friend from back when I was doing more building, and his amps are killer. He actually built an amp that's very similar to Dan's Big Verb. That's I think he calls it Chihuahua, and it's you can have it either as a 5 or a 10 watter. Guy Narian. These things are tough. What do you think of the Princeton with a 12-inch Jensen Alnico? I think it's pretty loud, enough to gig with. Yeah, I think it all depends on the gig. That's a tremendous thing. Like I said before, I think you just need to know that your sound guy's got it. Because if you go start fighting, if you're trying to fight for stage volume with the drummer, you might lose. Riddle Music is reminding me that Thomann has Cornell amps. Somebody's asking about Canadian amp companies. The one that I am closest to is Rev. That's tremendous. Oh, Ben Fletcher is reminding us that there's 800 people watching and 800 different amps. Best amps. Yeah, that's probably it, Ben. And Ben, I didn't see it go by in the stream. What you're currently playing. Ben Fletcher has a YouTube channel that I follow because he's such a killer slide player. And you should all check him out because his slide playing is excellent. Actually, a friend of 5 Watt, Kyle Kavalik from the West Coast, a guy from one of the very first classes at Musicians Institute, is a friend of 5 Watt, and he was telling me to check out Ben. Graham Elliott says he lives 10 miles from Dennis Cornell. That's great. That's a dangerous thing. I know that at one time, Bill Frisell said that he lived down the road from the guy that was building his custom Telecasters for him, and he said it was a very dangerous relationship. Tom Knox says, I have a Fender Twin, but I want warmer. What's a good tweed? Yeah, all tweed is great. It depends on what volume you need, Tom. If you want clean tweed, I would point you towards a Harvard or a Harvard circuit. Pearl City Amps builds a Harvard-style amp, though I can't, off the top of my head, come up with the name of it right now. And really then a 5E3, the Deluxes. My buddy Dave Honorato actually gigs a 59 Tweed Deluxe that he's had somebody go through, obviously, and he can maintain himself. And he gigs that. He gigs that on bar gigs, and he swears, just dime it and control the amp with the volume on your guitar. Tekkaman wants to know if there's a Sun history video in the works. It's on the list, and it really goes back to me having just a little bit of experience with, Sun solid-state amps being used for heavier music when I was sort of just first out of college. So, let's see. Jason Hobbs is saying he likes a 71 Fender Super Reverb, but it comes in second place to a 64 hand-wired Princeton. Oh, I haven't seen those yet. I'd really like to check out the little hand-wired Princetons with a P10R speaker. I have to say that I'm a fan of a 12-inch speaker in a Princeton, although it can sound a little cramped. You know, it kind of like gets a little bit like this. Rick told me a long time ago that that's 750 hertz. That's where the mid-range problems become a problem. DCM says that the best tweed amp is a JTM 45 or 100. LZ cool. Do you like orange amps? Can you do an orange amp history like you do those? Yeah, orange is on the list. Orange goes way, way back. And it was interesting. I didn't realize how long the history was of orange until I did some work. Sean Brooks is saying, get Mojitone to build you a Tweed Deluxe. Yeah, you could do a lot worse. Those guys do a really good job. And frankly, the kit, if you have any experience soldering, a Tweed Deluxe is just not a really tough amp to build. 75 YBA. Hey, back to you from Canada. Thanks for coming by here. Let's see. Steve is asking the big question. Why did I move away from 5-watt amps? Was it volume? I haven't moved away from 5-watt amps. It's hard for me to have stuff that's here and not getting used. And Dan didn't have the 5-watter designs up in back in Vermont to demo for people. And like he told me today that he was going to actually send my Big Verb out as a loaner to a local studio guy there. It's that I'm playing these other ones to get a sense of them. I don't have enough hours in a day to. I wish I did. You know, where I could play 2 hours for just me, and then actually do the work that I feel like I need to do with some pieces that I'm looking at. Which is why I am so stingy about being willing to try a piece of gear. As it is, you know, pedals are a challenge to try pedals, and actually it all works into, you know, me trying not to have too much stuff. So Steve, that's a great analogical question. It's not a volume thing because frankly with these I'm mostly dialing them back down, and probably at the volumes I play I'm never playing more than 5 watts anyway. 5 watts is then when the house is empty. Sean Brooks is asking if I've tried the Tone King Gremlin. I haven't. I actually don't know anybody at Tone King, but that's sort of always been on the list. Eddie Lagos asked, should we sell off our music gear and move towards minimalism? That would only be an answer that only you could decide on, Eddie. Minimalism, I think, is a term that often is sort of misconstrued to feel like it means like the logo tagline, right? The tagline, most music from the least gear. My loophole there is the word least. Least gear? The least gear is for the least for you. You know, I'm much more comfortable spending time talking about what's enough. And what's enough, as my buddy Patrick Rohn, he's not my buddy, he's just one of my favorite writers, but he wrote this book called Enough that you can get on Amazon as a Kindle download. And he basically says his definition, he reminds us all that the definition of what's enough for us is we learn that by having too little and by having too much. That without both of those extremes, then you really don't know what's enough for you. And so, you know, yeah, I think it's a great exercise to question why you're buying more gear if you just find yourself filling up the corners of your music room and you're not buying yourself more time to play. I think that's for me the ultimate question. Greg Height says that his dad built him a deluxe reverb in a head. That's great. His dad's a retired engineer. That's really great. I just sold my Gibson GA40 clone to Bill Sanderson, who's a friend of 5 Watt, actually ended up buying it. I talked to Bill on the phone today, kind of walk him through that amp. And that was originally a head. I had that set up as a head. It was really cool. Frank Perel's Everplay a Blackface Bandmaster, same as AV763 as the Deluxe, but a 40 watter. I have actually, because I had a friend that had a Bandmaster. This guy had a lot of amps, and he had a Bandmaster set up on his rotating speaker cabinet, which was a homemade version of the Fender rotating speaker like Stevie Ray used. So I have played through one of those. I have no use for 40 watts. I don't know what I would do with 40 watts. If you could have 3 amp to cover most of the tomes, what would it be? Manica Line wants to know. 3 amps. I don't need 3. But if it was 3, I think it's kind of like you see here. I tend to maybe not have a lot of imagination when it comes to this kind of stuff. I know people like Perry that have a number of the same style of guitar, but that have different pickups and different tones. I tend to try to see what the differences are. Although, frankly, I've been thinking about a video idea as I switch from the Les Paul to the Strat, or from the Telecaster to the Les Paul. It's kind of like playing 3 different instruments. I've never had a period in my life where I played so many hours a week that all my muting and those kinds of things was second nature. I know there's guys on the stream I know that are like that. People like Robert and Fluff, I think, have had periods of their life where they're just playing a ton of time, and they seem to have that together much more than I ever have. So switching between even just these 3 styles of guitars is really challenging for me. So the 3 major food groups for me would be, like, if you're gigging, I'd say a Deluxe, an AC-15. I don't really think anybody needs to haul around an AC-30 unless you got someone to carry it for you. And then a Marshall. And actually, I think the new Studio 20 is kind of the perfect balance of EL-34s and plenty of power. So I'd like to check one of those out at some point. But really, if I have a Fender style amp and a Dumble style pedal and a Marshall style pedal that I love, which I love David Barber's pedals when it comes to that kind of stuff, then that's all I need. Deadpool wants to know what's my favorite amp. Downstairs when I practice, that's a D20, a Rev D20 sitting on top of a Mojo Tone cabinet, 12-inch solid pine cabinet with a 12-inch Neo Creamback. And the reason that's there is it has a speaker load in it, internal speaker load, and IRs for recording. But more importantly, I can turn the speaker off and put on a set of headphones and still be sitting with the family and practice. So our Daniel Larson wants to know, are pedal amps the future? It's interesting. So there's a guy who's a longtime subscriber, and he is a full-on minimalist. And he's an electrical engineer, kind of a high-end, works for the government kind of an engineer. He built me a 25-watt amplifier, solid state amplifier, D, obviously class D amplifier, in a mini pedal. I'm going to bring it for one of the live streams. It's a mini pedal. It's gold. You put my logo on it. Just what a nice guy. It's got reverb. It's got a 3-band tone stack and it has reverb. So it's interesting. I said last time, if it's not, if tubes are still around, I think tubes will still be a thing. And maybe that'll change over time as people become more and more acquainted with modelers. BB's telling Kreenar to check out the 5-watt high watts. If you want to see somebody play those well, I'm working on the Mustang. I've started to work on the Mustang video. And Eric Hagen, who's a great YouTuber, is close to somebody at high watt. And he's been playing a 5-watt, high watt, say that 3 times fast, on his channel. So you can go over there and check out Eric Hagen playing really wonderfully on that. Michael Frizel asks, have I played any Bill Carruth modded amps? I lived in Burlington, Vermont. For those of you that might not know, Bill Carruth is kind of a famous amp guy who's now, I think Carruth's really pretty retired at this point. Boy, the thing did a big jump again here. And yeah, I've played a number of amps, not to slam Carruth at all, but when they were in to get repaired by Dan. So. Matt Fields, I'm not sure this is a question. I think he's telling everybody that reads most music with the most gear. What's the magic number? One more, chat. Seriously, look into building your own amps. Ton of great kits out there. I agree with Matt. You can build your own amps, but make sure you've got a tech locally who's going to help you out when you're doing testing and stuff. Because you can really, it's a serious thing. That's a lot of voltage. There's real danger in building your own amps. And though I had some good luck, I also had a great friend and mentor in Dan Lurie. So let's see. Bowen Hardy says head and cab or combo. Depends. I've got a head that I built with Dan that has an EF86, and an EF86 Pento tube is very sensitive to vibrations. So old AC15 combos that have, or AC10 combos that have an EF86 are really prone to that. You need to really pay attention. The GA40 that I just sold has a 5879. It's a tube of that type that can also be problematic. And so actually when I sold it, I had collected, because it's me, I had collected 9 or 10 original new old stock tubes that went with that amp. So either one, for me, it's about it's about how heavy is this. I used to own a Marshall Class 5, and yeah, they are really loud. The earliest ones had a noise, had a rattle. The later ones didn't so much. Electric Guitar Videos says Mesa Boogie's now working with Gibson. Any thoughts on that? Yeah, I hope they don't. I hope they. I'm excited by the idea of actually doing reissues of the old Gibson apps. There's a friend of the channel who's kind of a famous songwriter, Fred Knobloch from Nashville. And Fred's always preaching old Gibsons to me and trying to get me to consider doing those. And it's just harder to find information on it. So I'm curious to see what happens. It's a big company. It's a big corporation. So it'll be interesting to see how much they keep their hands off, and at the same time, how much maybe they can financially revitalize Mesa Boogie, because of course Mesa was quietly for sale for quite a while there, I think, out on the market. Eddie Lagos says, for someone who's never had a Dan Electro, which model would you recommend for the first time Dano? So after I did the Dan Electro history video, I had gotten the Les Paul, and it was cracking me up because, of course, as soon as I got the R9, people were saying, well, what pickups are you going to put in it? And I'm like, this is an expensive guitar. Like, I'm not immediately thinking of changing out the pickups. I am. But I thought, the answer to the question would probably be a DC59. The Jimmy Page model is the one that everybody seems to buy, the black 59. And I thought it would be an interesting project to mod a current one back to original spec. Because there's a lot of people that build lipstick tube pickups to the original spec, or have someone find somebody who's a luthier who's got an old piece of Brazilian rosewood for the bridge. Well, just because it's a little tiny piece, and you could get somebody like my local luthier is a really highly qualified guy. I'm going to see if I can get him to build one that's a little adjusted for intonation so that you could actually do it. I think it'd be an interesting project, and I think it would be fun for the channel. Jason Wade says his one amp is a Mesa Mark V 1025. Excellent. Yeah, one of the nicest things I think about the modern Mesas is the switchable stuff. Generic Stain regarding the Mustang video. I see you mean a short history. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. I'm going to do a short history on the Mustang. Competition Mustangs had their decals applied by Silkscreen. Water slide. Thanks for letting us know that. All right, we're almost out of time here. Any final questions here? I say that with, BB Ninja says throwbacks for the win. I actually talked to John at Throwback already about what we should do as far as those. Okay. I think that wraps it up. Thanks everybody for kicking in their favorite amp choices. That's kind of what I expected it to be. A love fest for people's favorite amps. Somebody's asking me to do a Rickenbacker video. Seattle Day. Yeah, that's on my list. There's so many guitars to do, and then there'd be an overall volume probably. Okay. Well, thanks again. And I appreciate everybody's coming and hanging out.